Hello and welcome back to Age of the Classics. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bert. Join us today as we continue the journey of Abby Abigail and her quest to find the ultimate headline. We're here to start Chapter 3, It's Not Fair. Let's get going. Pounding the typewriter keys as hard as she could made Abby feel better. The good thing about writing was that she got to tell the whole story without anyone interrupting or contradicting her. Abby was pleased with her article when it was finished. It explained exactly what had happened and how the teacup was broken. Then, at the end, it said, "Sometimes a person's trying to do something nice for someone, you hear? For another person, you see? And it turns out badly, sadly, by mistake. Yeah. And when something bad happens, it isn't anyone's fault. No one should be blamed. It's just not fair, you see?" Abby pulled her article out of the typewriter and marched outside to sit on the steps and wait for Dad to come home. She brought her book about Robin Hood to read while she waited. Abby had not been reading long before the screen door squeaked open and slammed shut behind her. Abby didn't even lift her eyes off the page. Charlie sat next to her. "Hi," he said. Abby didn't answer. She was a little put out with Charlie for adding to the trouble in Sterling's room. "What's eating you, Squirt?" Charlie asked. "Nothing," said Abby as huffily as she could. Charlie looked at the piece of paper next to Abby. "Is that one of your newspapers for Dad?" Abby replied, "Yeah, you see?" Charlie picked up Abby's newspaper and looked at the headline. "It's not fair," he read aloud. Then he asked, "What's it all about?" "Well, it's about how it's wrong to blame people for things that's not your fault, you see?" said Abby. "For example, me, for the mess this afternoon." Charlie replied, "Come on, Abby. That's nothing. You shouldn't make a big deal of it." Abby retorted, "That's easy for you to say." Charlie took a deep breath in and let it out. "Listen, Abby." Suddenly his voice was serious. "I wouldn't bother Dad with the newspaper today if I were you." Abby slammed her book shut and looked sideways at Charlie. "Why not?" Charlie glanced over his shoulder to be sure that no one except Abby would hear him. "Well, you know how a lot of people lost their jobs because of the Depression, don't you?" Abby could think of Mr. Howard. "Yeah, I know what you mean." Charlie replied, "Well, yesterday Dad told Mother and me he's closing down his car dealership and going out of business." Abby was horrified. But, why?" "Why do you think?" said Charlie. "Because nobody's got no money for a car anymore. They haven't for a long time." Abby asked, "Well, how come Dad didn't say anything before this?" Charlie replied, "He didn't want to worry. He didn't want us to worry either. He kept hoping things would get better if he just hung on. Well, he didn't even fire any of his salesmen. He just kept using his own savings to keep paying our salaries." Abby wondered what they were going to do now. But Charlie didn't know. "He's even got to give his car back. He can't afford it no more. I guess he'll look for another job, though that's pretty hopeless these days, you see?" Abby was sure that Charlie was wrong. "Anyone can see that Dad's smart and hard-working. And he has so many friends. People still remember him from when he was a baseball star in college. Plenty
way. People will be glad to hire them.
Charlie just shrugged.
There ain't many jobs that we had, you see? Why do you think people are going away?
Abby was struck by a terrible thought.
Dad's not going to leave like Mr. Howard did. We're not going to lose our house like the Howards did too, are we?
Charlie didn't know. Abby could hardly breathe.
It's going to be a struggle, kid,
said Charlie.
Dad told me that he and Mom don't own the house completely. They borrowed money from the bank to buy it, and they got to pay the bank back a little bit every month. It's called a mortgage, you see. If they don't have enough money to pay the mortgage, the bank's going to take the house back.
Abby asked,
Well, people at the bank won't just cook us onto the street, will they?
But Charlie said,
That's exactly what they'll do. You seen those pictures in the newspapers of whole families and all their belongings out in the street, nowhere to go.
Abby wanted to believe that it wasn't gonna happen to them. Charlie hoped not to.
Listen,
said Abby.
How come Dad told Mother and you about losing the job, but not me? Ain't I part of the family?
Charlie sighed a huge, sad sigh.
Dad told me, 'cause it means I ain't gonna be going to college.
Abby cried out, full of sympathy and misery.
Oh, Charlie, that's awful. That's terrible. That ain't fair.
She knew that Charlie had been looking forward to college so much. Charlie grinned a cheerless grin and tapped one finger on Abby's newspaper.
That's your headline, isn't it? These days a lot of things are happening that ain't fair. There's no one to blame and there's nothing that can be done about it. You better get used to it, Abby. Life's not like books. There's ain't no bad guy, and sometimes there ain't no happy ever after either. You see?
At that moment, Abby felt an odd sensation. Things were happening so fast. It was as if a match had been struck inside her and a little flame was lit, burning like anger, flickering like fear.
Charlie, what's going to happen to us?
Charlie didn't know. He stood up to go.
Wait,
said Abby.
How come you told me about Dad? Was it to stop me bothering Dad with my newspaper?
Charlie replied.
No, Squirt. I told you 'cause you're a part of the family. And I figured you deserve to know, you see?
Abby was grateful for Charlie treating her like a grown-up. And she was glad he had told her, even though she wished it weren't true. After Charlie left, Abby sat on the step thinking. No wonder Dad had not been happy about the Howards coming to stay. He must have been worried about more mouths to feed. And no wonder Mother had been short-tempered today, when she said that even though it was nobody's fault, they were still in a mess. She must have been thinking about Dad. It wasn't Dad's fault that they'd fallen into the terrible slippery hole of the Depression. And yet, it surely seemed as though they had. Just like the Howards, just like the kids at school, just like the people she'd read about in the newspaper. The sun was setting, but it was still very hot outside. The air was so humid, the whole world looked blurry. Then, all too clearly, Abby saw a terrible sight. It was Dad. He was walking home. He did not see Abby yet, but she could see that he looked hot and tired. There was a discouraged droop to his shoulders that Abby had never seen before. It made Abby's heart twist with sorrow. For just the tiniest of seconds, she did not want to face Dad. She knew that when she did, she'd have to face the truth of all that Charlie had told her. But then Abby stood up, straightened her shoulders, and everything else in the whole world might change for Dad, but Abby would not. Abby ran to Dad the way she had done every other night of her life when he had come home. Dad caught her up and swung her around. When Dad put her down, Abby looked Dad straight in the eye.
Charlie told me. Is it true?
Dad knelt down so that his eyes were level with Abby's.
Yeah, it's true.
Abby asked if they were going to be all right. But Dad didn't know. He truly did not know. Abby threw her arms around Dad and hugged him hard. She crumpled up her newspaper in her fist behind Dad's back. Her complaints about Sterling and the teacup seemed silly and babyish now. Charlie was right. Dad didn't need to read her newspaper. Dad knew all about trying to be nice to people and having it turn out badly. He knew all about having bad things happen that were nobody's fault. He knew all about things that were not fair. Abby was a practical girl. She thought it was a waste of time to worry about a problem when you could be doing something to solve it. But her family had never had a problem as serious as this one before. All night, Abby lay awake thinking, listening to Sterling cough and worrying. The night was very hot. Abby kicked her sheet off and turned her pillow over time and time again because it got so sweaty so fast. Finally, Abby got up. It always made her feel better to write. So she took her notepad and a pencil out of her desk and sat at the window in the moonlight. She decided to make a list of all the ways she could save the money for the family. No dancing lessons. No fancy dresses for dancing lessons. Abby looked at her list and scolded herself. It was all very well to give up dancing lessons and fancy dresses. Those were things she didn't want. But how about the things she did want? Abby looked out the window. Then, sadly, added to her list. No lumber for a treehouse. No new books. No tickets to baseball games. No sweets. Abby would show the list to Dad tomorrow. But by the time Abby went downstairs to breakfast the next morning, Dad had already left.
He's gone to meet a business friend,
said Mother.
It'd be great if his friend offered Dad a job, wouldn't it?
Said Abby. Mother agreed. She smiled, but it wasn't one of her real smiles. Abby felt all restless and jumpy. She wanted to be alone so that she could think and work on her list some more. She wandered around the yard for a while before she found a good hideaway under the back porch. No one will find me here, she thought. But she had not been hidden long before Ruthie crawled in next to her.
How do you always find me?
Asked Abby. Ruthie shrugged.
It's easy. I just think where I'd be if I were you, and that's where you are. Why are you hiding, by the way?
Abby sighed.
My dad lost his job.
Ruthie said softly.
That's too bad. I'm sorry.
The girls sat together in silence for a minute. That was a good thing about Ruthie. She'd sit and think with Abby. She didn't need to talk all the time. Ruthie wondered what Abby was going to do. Abby handed Ruthie her list.
These are ways I can help save money.
Ruthie read the list.
These are good. These will help.
But Ruthie's voice sounded doubtful. Abby sighed.
The truth is, I just never been given any money much thought before.
Ruthie agreed. Abby understood that when Dad sold a car, people gave him money. Dad gave some of the money to Mother. She used it to buy food and clothes and to pay the electric bill and the iceman and to get things for the house. Once a month, Dad paid the bank $25, which, as Charlie had explained, was part of the money that Dad and Mother owed the bank because they borrowed it when they bought the house. If there was any money left over after everything was paid, Dad put it in his savings account at the bank.
Without Dad's job, there ain't gonna be no money coming in. And Charlie said Dad used up most of his savings to pay his salesman as long as he could. So soon there ain't gonna be no money left in his savings. What are we gonna do then?
Ruthie replied,
I read lots of books about people who have no money.
Abby said,
Me too. But most of them lived in the olden days on farms or in a forest where they could at least get nuts and berries, yeah? We live in modern times in Cincinnati. You see? How are we going to get any food when our money's gone? When we move to a farm?
Ruthie didn't think Abby's mom would like that. Abby agreed.
Besides, none of us know nothing about farming.
Ruthie scratched her knee.
I think we're going to have to hope that your dad gets another job.
Abby agreed.
Yep, maybe today. What a great headline that'd be.
That concludes Chapter 3, It's Not Fair, in Meet Abby. Join us for Chapter 4, Mother's Brainstorm. As always, I'd like to thank you for joining us on AJ Classics. Join us next week. Thanks.